Okay, so as a great web developer, we are constantly on the lookout for fantastic hosting environment. So with that, this video is all about hosting. And I'm gonna use WordPress as the example here because I feel like WordPress is one of those platforms that we have to have or even make sure to have fantastic hosting. So in this video, we're gonna look at what it entails to have good hosting, great hosting, and even what is bad hosting. On top of that, I'm also going to show you how to properly connect your local machine to your server using SSH, using Git, and not using FTP. Like FTP was great, and don't get me wrong, FTP is a good thing, especially when you start off in this industry. But in this video, I'm going to show you the proper way of connecting to your server or to your hosting environment with your local machine using SSH as well as Git. Now, on top of that, I'm also going to share a couple of things that I look out for when selecting a hosting environment. And I'm also going to show you a hosting environment that I really like, that I've been using for a number of years. And the reason I've used them is because I was in a situation many years ago where a lot of my websites got compromised and I had to look for a new, fast and secure hosting environment, specifically for WordPress. And that's how I got to this company. And this company is called SiteGround. You probably heard of them many times. For this video, we are gonna use SiteGround. I'm gonna show you why I've selected SiteGround. Oh, and a little bonus content at the end of the video. I'm gonna show you a couple of features that SiteGround has that has literally saved me tons of hours. Now, on top of that, I'm also going to share a couple of things what you should look out for when selecting a hosting environment, things like security, things like performance, which is crucial for WordPress. All right, so on top of that, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. I truly appreciate that. I share videos like this on a weekly, daily, and monthly basis. So with that said, let's jump into it. Okay, so before we jump into this, there's a couple of stats that I just want to throw your way. If you're in a situation where you think that WordPress isn't relevant anymore, because I feel like there's some people that do feel that way, here's a couple of stats. So up to 40% of websites out there are still on the WordPress platform, is still on the CMS-based platform. And the reason why it's so popular is because of its features where people that are non-developers can easily log into it and make any changes. So specifically for companies like web design companies or marketing agencies, WordPress is a perfect solution. Why? Because their clients can physically log in and make any changes. So back to it, up to 40% of websites are on this CMS-based platform, and it's actually growing. It's growing significantly fast. The other point that was really shocking to me is the e-commerce dominance. So it looks like up to 28% of websites are on their WooCommerce platform. Now, if you didn't know that, WooCommerce is owned by WordPress, and it's one of the most popular e-commerce platforms out there, despite Shopify having the dominance in this industry. But WooCommerce has a pretty strong presence with up to 28%. That was really shocking to me. I was not expecting that. The other reason why people use WordPress, and probably one of my favorite points, is SEO. Like, SEO friendliness on a WordPress site is tremendous. You can use tools like Semrush or MathRank to really optimize your on-page SEO. And that's one of the reasons why WordPress is so popular. Now, the fourth point is adaptability and community. Now, WordPress is the only platform out there that boasts a huge community, especially when you are a customer or even a developer of a WordPress site. Your support is significant. So the community is quite large and it's much bigger than I thought it was. And I've been developing in WordPress for the past 10, 12 years. And I was quite shocked to see how the community is significantly growing. And then the last point, which is not really a stat, it's more a point, more the reason why WordPress is still relevant, is because of ease of use. It is so easy to set up WordPress. It's so straightforward to get WordPress going. But one of the key takes though, one of the key things that I've learned using WordPress for such a long time is it's all about how you develop the site. And by the way, I am going to drop a video on how to properly develop a WordPress site from start to finish, all focused on that lean coding. Okay, so now with the stats out of the way, and by the way, it wasn't 100% stats. There was a couple of pointers that I put in there. That's just general kind of opinions or my analysis of the entire platform. Now, One of the things that I want to talk about next is the actual hosting environment, and when selecting a proper hosting environment, there's a couple of things you got to keep in mind. And by the way, that's why I use SiteGround, is because it literally checks off every single box of the pointers that I'm going to point out right now. All right, so the first one is performance and speed. So performance and speed is a big deal, especially when it comes to WordPress. Why? Because you're constantly connecting to a MySQL database. And that is one of the reasons why WordPress can be slow, one of the reasons why WordPress can have some performance issues. So when selecting a hosting environment, you always want to make sure that the performance and speed is the number one priority for that hosting company. Now, just to kind of go back a few years, I always thought this was not true. I always thought that, you know what, it doesn't matter what hosting environment you use. When you set up WordPress, it's good to go. Everything will kind of fall into place and we should be good to go. Well, when I moved to a good hosting environment, I was quite shocked at how quickly a WordPress site can be when it's on a good hosting environment. All right, so the second point is security features. Like, this is so crucial. And the reason for that is, in a lot of cases, people tend to forget to update their WordPress site. And not just that, sometimes we install plugins or themes that is not properly vetted or doesn't get updated on a regular basis. So security is quite essential. Now, when I say security, it's not just about updating a WordPress plugin, but you also want to make sure that the hosting environment you select has proper features in place to make sure that security is at the utmost priority. Here's an example. So the hosting environment that I use, which is SiteGround, they have a node approach, which I really like, which means that every single WordPress installation or every single WordPress site is in its own node. So therefore, if one WordPress site gets infected or has some specific malware, it's not a big deal because it can't really cross-contaminate to different types of WordPress environments. Now, I can tell you from experience, I've been there where I had about 200 WordPress sites on a server and one of them got infected and it spread to all of them. It literally took us weeks to clean it all up. And that was, by the way, when I moved to this hosting environment. And that's when I was absolutely shocked because of the performance and the security. Now, on top of that, this hosting environment, which is SiteGround, they do have extra security features, and I'm going to show it to you. In the bonus content at the end of this video, I'm going to show you some of these features, which is really, really cool. Okay, so the third point, which is also important, is scalability. When you select a hosting environment, you want to make sure that whatever hosting environment you select, it's got to be scalable, which means you can spin up a WordPress site in seconds, and not just 1, 10, 20, 100. So selecting that environment has to be also focused, not just on security, not just on performance, but also scalability. Time is important. I always say that time is a valuable asset. You want to make sure that you don't spend tons and tons of time on stuff that's not really worth it. So coming back to it, scalability, super important. You want to make sure that whatever hosting environment you select, you can literally spin up a WordPress site in seconds. So the last point, which is super, super important, that's probably the second or even the most important part, is customer service. Like, there's a lot of solutions out there where we have hosting environments that are great, that is affordable and is fast and is secure and all that, but the customer service sucks. So that's why I've specifically selected SiteGround as my go-to hosting environment specifically for WordPress, is because of their customer service. Like, it's absolutely insane that when you connect or contact SiteGround, their customer service is just impeccable. It's like you speak to level 4 support, not even level 1, not even level 2. Like, it's all about when you speak to them, they know exactly what's going on, which is really cool. I really like that because a lot of hosting environments out there, it literally takes hours to get to the end result. Let's say you struggle with a domain problem or struggling with this or that, whatever the case might be. It always takes so much time to try and get the right person to help you, especially if they have like a level 1, 2, 3, and 4 support, which doesn't make sense to me. Where with this hosting environment, when you connect with them, you have proper support. They've helped me a ton. So when selecting a hosting environment, that is also a key aspect, is support, customer support. It is essential. Okay, so just 2 things real quick. When you work with any type of WordPress, and this is probably most developers already know this, But there's two things I quickly want to touch base on, and I kind of touched base on it already, but I really want to make sure that we are aware of this, and that is security. We got to make sure that when you manage or install or just overall develop in a WordPress environment, you want to make sure that you always update a WordPress site. Like stats show that up to 80% of WordPress sites out there is not properly updated or not properly configured to be secure. So to make sure that everything is always up to date, I always go for the auto update feature, but you got to be careful because if you have plugins or themes that are custom developed, sometimes when you do auto updates, you can run into compatibility issues. So tread lightly here, but in most cases, 99% of the time, auto updates, that's a good solution. It's a great solution. Then the last thing, just a quick thing, if you are not a developer, you're watching this video and you own a WordPress site, you're not 100% sure, but you came across this video, make sure to always update. It's crucial. I've seen it so many times where WordPress sites just go offline because they are not properly updated. Okay, so one thing I quickly want to touch base on, and I know this video is starting to get super long, but trust me, you are really going to like what I'm showing you here, especially the bonus stuff, especially me kind of diving into the whole SSH FTP versus FTP thing. But a couple of things that I want to talk about, just touch base on, and it is how to properly connect to a WordPress site. Now, conventionally, we usually connect to any type of site, specifically WordPress, using either, file management tools within the hosting environment or use FTP and PHPMyAdmin. Now, don't get me wrong, they are great, especially when you're a beginner, especially when you start off being a developer. But at some point, you're going to want something better. Now, with that all said, we usually use a tool called FileZilla, specifically for FTP. But in the last few years, FileZilla has been compromised, and it's been shown, quote unquote, and in my opinion, that there are sometimes malware attached to the download files, specifically if you are on a PC. Okay, so FileZilla has always been the go-to tool for any type of FTP communication between your local machine and the server. And I'm actually going to show you how to not use that at all, not to use FileZilla. We're actually going to use SSH, and this video, I'm going to show you how to set up that SSH connection to a hosting environment. Now, as I said, I am using SiteGround specifically for this, but you can use it for any type of hosting environment that allows this. Now, one thing to note though is SSH connection from a local machine to a server is super secure and it's highly performance. But one thing you got to keep in mind though is not all hosting environments offer this feature. They do sometimes offer SFTP, which is not the same thing. So this specific way of connecting to a server, again, super secure, but not all hosting environments offer it. Now, just a couple of things why we want to use SSH and why we want to go this approach. Now, as I've already mentioned, super secure, but it is enhanced security. Like it is really much more secure than FTP. And this is more important because we don't want any type of eavesdropping. With FTP, it's all text-based. With SSH, it's the next level. Now to my second point, which I kind of already mentioned, but FTP uses plain text data to transfer data from your local machine to the server, which makes it a possibility that somebody can eavesdrop. The other reason, the third point, also kind of for this video, is Git control. I've been in many situations where I had multiple developers work on one project, and when you use FTP, you have absolute no control over when somebody uploads a file or downloads a file or overwrites your code. And that's kind of where Git and GitHub and Git control and Git access comes into play, because you can physically control what code gets uploaded. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to properly do that, by the way. Now, the next part of this video, I'm actually going to show you how to set up. We're going to start with the local machine. And what you need though is Visual Studio Code. You're also going to need a great hosting environment. Now, by the way, in the description below, I have a link if you want to sign up for SiteGround. They always have great deals going on, so check the link below if you want to use them to follow this. But coming back to it, you want to make sure that you have Visual Studio Code installed, as well as GitHub Desktop. GitHub Desktop does save a lot of time. You don't need it, but we are going to use it. Now, there's a couple of plugins in Visual Studio Code that I use, and I'll share it with you as we go through this video. Now, I am going to do this on a Mac. If you have a PC, I am going to drop a video specifically in how to do all of this in WSL, how to set up WSL. So drop a comment below if you want me to create that video and get it out as quick as possible. Again, if you don't have a Mac, that's fine. You can still follow us. Just make sure to enable WSL on your PC and you should be good to go. So with that all said, let's jump into it. Right off the bat here, you'll see that I have Visual Studio Code open and I am on the welcome screen. And just to show you, when you click on the folders, there's nothing going on. It's brand new. Now, if you haven't worked with Visual Studio Code yet, make sure to navigate to code.visualstudio.com or just search Visual Studio Code download in Google or Bing, and you will find the page where you can download it right here. And obviously I am working on a Mac, so it's telling me to download it for Mac Universal. So I always go for the stable solution. Make sure to download that. The other thing that you also want to look at as well, especially for this tutorial that we are going to do, and you don't have to have it, but it definitely helps a lot, and that is Github Desktop. So you'll see that I already have a WordPress public HTML, but we'll get rid of that because we're going to start fresh. But this really helps because it helps with when you check in your code or you want to check back or roll back or update anything. Github Desktop is a great tool, and when you download and install it, it'll also automatically install all the Git necessities that you need for this to properly run. All right, going back to Visual Studio Code here, as you can see, as I said, clean copy. And now the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start with the SSH process. So let me explain a bit here before we jump into it. The first thing we need to do is we need to create a public key on our local machine, and then we will use that public key to actually establish an SSH connection to our hosting environment. And like I said, we are using SiteGround for this example. All right, so first things first, we have our Visual Studio Code here. We have the welcome screen. I'm going to click on terminal, and I'm actually going to open up a new terminal. All right, so with the terminal open up here, we are going to punch in a couple of commands here. The first thing I want to do is actually generate a public key, as I said. So we're going to type in SSH and we're going to say keygen. Perfect. So now when you've typed that in, you will see that it's asking you where you want that to be saved. So by default, it will have your user /.ssh/ whatever the case might be. And at this stage, I think I am pretty good with this. So I am just going to hit enter. I think that's good enough. And now I've already created a SSH public certificate. That's why it's asking me this question, but it won't ask you this question. But I'm going to go ahead and override mine. And the next phase, which is super important, is it's going to ask you to enter a passphrase. So I highly recommend you do that. Passphrases just makes an extra layer of protection, makes it a little bit more secure. So we're going to go ahead and type in your passphrase. You can call it whatever you want. You'll do notice that it's going to ask you twice, and you'll notice as you type, it's not actually going to show anything. All right, now you'll see, boom, it created our beautiful public key. Now, obviously I have blurred out some of this just because it is a public key. Perfect. So now at this stage, we have successfully created our public key, and now we are going to use this public key to connect to our hosting environment. So again, I'm using SiteGround, and in the description below, I do have a link if you want to sign up. They do have some great deals going on. But with that, if you use your own environment, you can definitely go ahead and do that. So next up, we are going to look at connecting that. All right, so now that the SSH public key was successfully created, I already went ahead to SiteGround and I logged in. I also navigated to the websites tab, and I am at the website section. So essentially what we're going to do now is we're going to create a new site. So I am going to click on new website, and the first thing it's going to do is it's going to ask you for your plan. Again, if you're not using SiteGround, you want to go ahead and start creating a WordPress site. I am doing this now through SiteGround, and part of this I'm actually going to show you how quickly and easy it is to spin up a WordPress site on SiteGround. With that, I've just selected my hosting plan, which in most cases you probably only have one, but you're going to hit continue, and then it's going to ask you, okay, where do you want this website to be located? So this is part of that notes that I was talking about. You can actually select in what data center you want this to be reside. So I'm just going to go with Iowa and USA. That's perfect for me where I am located. And with that, you are going to have a couple of options here. You can go and create a new domain, use an existing domain, or use a temporary domain. So I am going to go for temporary domain because this is just a test, and you'll see that it automatically created a temporary domain for me. Now, this is huge because in most cases, when you are using a hosting environment and you don't have a domain, especially when you have a client that you are going to design and develop the website for, and you don't have a proper domain for them yet, we always had to use hosts files or any type of A records or C names within a specific domain. But with SiteGround, they already have it for you. So it's really, really great. And you save a lot of time. Again, it's all about time saving, right? So I have my temporary domain here. And when I hit continue, the next step it's going to ask me is, hey, do you want to start a new website or do you want to migrate an existing website? So in our case, I'm going to start a new website and it's going to ask you, okay, is it WordPress, is it WooCommerce, or is it Weebly? And we're just going to go for a basic WordPress site. So I'm going to click that and then it's going to ask you for your email address and your password. Now this is going to be the email address and password that you're going to use to log into the WordPress. So you want to make sure that your password is super strong. Now, I use tools where I don't need to worry about passwords. I just generate them automatically. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. We are going to generate this password right here. So SiteGround does have the ability to do that. So you'll see on the right-hand side that it gives you that option. So you just want to hit copy and put it somewhere safe. But on a side note, you don't have to worry about losing your password as long as you still have your login credentials for your SiteGround account, because in the dashboard, you can literally go to Site Tools and you can log straight in to the WordPress environment. Most hosting companies do, however, offer this. So I'm going to hit continue and we're going to get this thing to spin up. Now, this normally takes a minute or two and it's going to ask you for a site scanner. So if you're in a situation where you are migrating a website and you are migrating it from a different hosting provider and your website was compromised, this is a great tool to use. And they do offer, it looks like 30-day free when you renew. Overall, this is just a great tool to use because their tool is powerful. Like if you have any issues with your website in regards to any type of malware, this tool can help you clean out that website. So I definitely used this plugin, as I've mentioned before, when my sites were compromised and I had to migrate everything over to SiteGround. I used this plugin or this tool or this feature of SiteGround. All right, so we're not going to use that just because we have a brand new WordPress site. I'm just going to hit finish and we're going to get this thing to spin up. Now, coming back to it though, as I've said, it does take a minute or two and they do kind of tell you, hey, it takes about 2 minutes for everything to create, which is fine. And again, why am I using SiteGround? Well, the nice thing about this is, again, you've seen it takes 2 seconds to spin up a WordPress site. And the other cool thing is this isn't a node, as I've said a million times now, but this is in a node, which means that if one site gets compromised, it does not infect or cross-contaminate the rest of your sites, which a lot of hosting providers, especially the more affordable part, the more shared hosting environments, you always have that risk that if one website gets compromised or one website is not doing great, it can cross-contaminate. All right, so one thing I did notice, and because I've been using SiteGround for quite a while, it can get stuck at this phase right here. So I normally just navigate to websites and I would just hit refresh. And when I hit refresh and I do this site created, if I filter it to the date, you'll see that boom, there's our site. There's our site already created, which is perfect. So I have the site, it's showing me the hosting plan. So I am on hosting plan number 3. And obviously it's showing me when it was created. Now there's a couple of things on the right-hand side. You can manage a few things. You can manage users. So if you have a client and you want to provide them access, you can manage it right here. You can also transfer ownership. So once a website is done and you want to transfer it to your customer's hosting environment within SiteGround, you can also do that. And obviously you can also do offline mode. You build a website for a client and they didn't pay you or whatever the case might be. You can also temporarily deactivate the site. But with all that, let's navigate to Site Tools. I'm going to click on Site Tools and let's have a look at what's going on here. So once it's loaded up, it is going to show you a couple of things. The dashboard area. So it's going to show you how big it is, disk space 1 meg. Now, the site IP is quite important. If your DNS settings are not within SiteGround and you want to point it, your A records or whatever the case might be, then the site IP would be first step. But quite honestly, for the longest time, I had my domain names at a different location and I actually had it through Cloudflare as well. And I've noticed recently, and when I say recently, it's been a few years already, but SiteGround has teamed up with Cloudflare, which is a great solution because you can actually integrate Cloudflare into SiteGround as well. Anyway, with that all said, what we are trying to do here, I'm just going to quickly run you through it. When you go to site, you will see that we have file manager, FTP accounts, which obviously we're not going to use in this example at all. We're going to stay away from FTP accounts as far as possible, but FTP access and FTP accounts are there if you want or need to use it. And we have MySQL and so forth and so forth. Now, the biggest thing, the first thing I want to jump into is the actual devs. So I want to click on the devs and we want to navigate to SSH Key Manager. Now, again, the first part of this video, we created that public key, and now we're actually going to import it. So we're not going to generate one. You never want to generate a public key or any key from the server. You want to do it the other way around, and that's just for performance and security purposes. Drop a comment below if you want me to dive deep into why we rather upload a public key versus doing it the other way around. Okay, so we're going to click on import, and we are going to import that public key. Now, I normally import my public key from the file itself. I don't copy and paste. So I'm going to click on that. And when you click on it and when you're on a Mac, it's automatically going to show you the desktop. So obviously we don't want that. So what I want to do is hit Command Shift and G, and I'm going to type in that little squirrely thing /.ssh, and we're going to hit enter, and it's going to navigate us to that folder where our SSH public key is residing. All right. So with that, you will notice that I already have a few things. I will dive into this a little later, but I want to use the ID_RSA. I am going to go, in this case, we are going to go with the .pub, and we're going to see how that goes. So we're going to hit upload, and everything looks good. You will see that it automatically creates a key name for you, and it puts everything in there. So the whole public key is within there, and I'm going to hit import, and we're going to get it to do its thing. Now, it is immediate, which is pretty cool. This part can be cumbersome, and the reason for that is because not everybody actually uses this approach when connecting to a hosting environment. This is a more advanced level, and trust me, once we've done with all this, you are going to appreciate this and you're going to love it. All right, now that we have our SSH key up and running, we have the SSH type. It says SSH-RSA. Now, here's one very, very important thing that we do need to tweak, and that is the IP allowed. We currently have any type of IP that can connect to the server. Now, technically, they don't have the passphrase, which is fine, but I love to have that extra step where I do take the IPs and put in my specific IP so that we can only have my IP connect to it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to add my IP. So I'm going to click on the three dots, and we're going to say manage IP, and we're going to add our IP. Now, if you don't know how to actually access your IP, you can click on a new tab, and we're just going to say, what's my IP? So you literally just going to Google that, and it will pop up and show you what your IP is. Now, sometimes Google will show you your IP and your IP version 4 and your IP version 6 right here, and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm just going to click on the first window right here, and we're going to get our public IP. Now, obviously, I am going to blur this out so you won't able to see what my IP is, but let's start with the IP version 4. So we're going to take the IP version 4, we're going to go back to SiteGround, and we're going to drop that in there. And once that's dropped in, we're going to hit the little plus button because I like to have IP version 6 in there as well. Now, if you don't have IP version 6 infrastructure on your computer, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Just have the IP version 4 up and running or add it to it. That is fine. But with that all, we want to make sure we have version 4 and version 6 if you have version 6. Now, with that all done, I'm going to hit the confirm button. We're going to add it. Now, we have added 2 IP addresses, and only those 2 IP addresses have physical access to our server via SSH. All right, so now that we have that up and running, the next thing I want to do is actually set up Git. So we have to set up Git. Now, there's a few things that we quickly need to discuss before we actually start jumping into Git, and you will see that SiteGround does give you that huge notification, and that is all about your plugins and updating WordPress. So it says that if we have or set up Git through SiteGround, it will disable auto updates. So it does say this does not affect updates managed by our auto update system, but it says creating a Git repository may disable WordPress's native auto update feature. So when you set up a WordPress site, you can have that functionality through WordPress itself that it will auto update. But what they're saying here is that in some cases, when you create Git, it will disable that feature, but don't worry about it. SiteGround does have its own auto update features, and we'll jump into that a little later. All right, so with that all said, we do have, it says select your installation. So we do have the installation right here, and I'm just going to hit create, and we're going to create a entire Git repository right here. It normally takes a few seconds, but you'll see, okay, cool, everything is done. We have our Git repository up and running. Beautiful. Okay, so one thing though is when you click on Git info, you will see that we have our Git clone command, and it also shows you files that are excluded from the repository. Now, you can also manage this through Visual Studio Code, and I'll show you how to do that. We can actually add 1 or 2 of them here because sometimes we don't want all of the files to actually be going through Git. In some cases, maybe you are going to develop a plugin or we're going to develop a theme, and therefore we want to exclude a couple of those files. All right, so with that, we are going to hit close because there's one thing that I quickly want to do though. One thing I want to double check, and you'll notice, and you'll see right here, it says HTTP. So it's not saying HTTPS, which is not good. So let's jump into that and let's figure out what's going on here. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to navigate to WordPress and we want to go to the install and manage. Let's have a chat about this here real quick. Here you'll see that you have your managed installation, your managed WordPress installations right here. And I just want to quickly navigate and log into the site itself. So I'm going to click on this little box here and it says cannot open new tab, your browser does not allow. So okay, I'm using Safari and Safari does have some blocking features going on here. So I'm just going to see if we can open it up in a different way. It's probably going to block it again. Yeah, that's fine. But the point that I was trying to show here, and we'll jump back and we'll get back to this in a second here. The point that I was trying to show here is that we don't have the SSL certificate up and running yet. Now, when you don't use something like SiteGround or a hosting environment like SiteGround, then you need to go and purchase an SSL, or you can go through Cloudflare. Yeah, fair. You can also get a free SSL cert through Cloudflare, which is fair. But I want to show you how quickly it is to actually activate it through SiteGround itself. So we're going to click on security. We're going to go to SSL Manager. And when you're in the SSL Manager, we are literally just going to select our site, which is this one right here. And we're going to click on Let's Encrypt and we're going to say get. And now what it's going to do, it's actually going to generate that SSL certificate for us. Now, it's very important that you do all this before we start developing, before we start accessing the website. You want to make sure that you do this first. So the SSL certificate, after you've uploaded your public SSH or anything like that, you want to make sure that you do add this right here. All right, so with that all added, we are going to wait a second or two. It does take some time. And whilst that is doing that, I just quickly want to show you something. Once the SSL certificate is done, we can also enforce it on the website. So obviously it's still doing its thing, but we can go and enforce it. And if we transferred a website or migrated a website from a different hosting environment to this hosting environment, and the previous hosting environment didn't have an SSL certificate or had a different kind of infrastructure or a different kind of setup, we can also easily override by having their search and replace feature. So we can easily go and let's say search for, let's say HTTP, and I want you to replace HTTP with HTTPS. Now, I know it's super rare for some sites to be out there that doesn't have an SSL certificate. Maybe you are migrating from a local dev, maybe from a Docker environment. And here we can easily do that. So this will actually search your entire database and replace it and put it in, which is perfect. I really like that. The traditional ways you had to normally go into PHP My Admin, you had to write a SQL script to actually override it, but this is a great way of doing it. All right, so let's navigate back to SSL Manager. You'll notice, hey, okay, great. It created our certificate for us and it's through Let's Encrypt. It's activated. Everything looks good. And we can quickly view the certificate if we want to do that, but we're not going to do that. That's not really what we want. But I'm just going to copy this URL right here. And there's probably a better way of navigating to the website. I just want to drop it in here. Let's see what happens. Let's see. Everything is working great. It's still saying not secure. This is normal because we are working through Safari. So in some cases, it can be that the SSH does take some time to actually reflect. But hey, look at that. It is already going to the actual certificate if I put in HTTPS. So that might be the case that we do need to do an override. So let's do that. Let's go and override it as well. So I'm going to go to search and replace, and we are going to search for HTTP, and we are going to replace it with HTTPS. Perfect. All right. So let's go ahead and replace that and let's see what happens. Okay. So now it's done. So hopefully the next time we do navigate to the website, it will automatically go to HTTPS. But with that all said, we also want to activate HTTPS enforce, which we kind of discussed a little earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and activate that. Boom. There it's activated. So now when we do navigate to the website, it should automatically route us to HTTPS. All right, so let's navigate there. Let's see. There we go. It's automatically going to HTTPS, which is beautiful. All right, so now that we have the base up and running, we have the basics going, I'm going to navigate back to Git. And let's have a quick look here. I am just for simplicity purposes, I'm just going to remove this and do it again just because of the SSL certificate. And we are going to make sure that it is HTTPS. So I'm just going to go and refresh it and have this entire page refresh. And once that's done, okay, so it looks like it's still saying HTTPS, which is fine. We'll just go with that for now. And we'll kind of route back and see if that is going to be an issue later on. But we have our Git repository up and running. We also have our SSH keys and key manager up and running. Now, just one or two quick things that I just quickly want to touch base on, and that is PHP manager. So you will notice that the PHP version that we are running is 7.4, which is a very stable version. Now, you can go and change it manually, but I like to just keep it. I just leave it so that SiteGround does what it needs to do. There is a huge difference between 7.4.33 and 8. Trust me, it's huge. And so we are just going to leave that so that they can manage it. But once they kind of upgrade it to 8, you definitely want to route back and make sure that you don't have any issues with your website. Now, with that all said, there's a couple of other things also under dev. So you can also do cron jobs. You can create and manage different cron jobs. And we can also do app installer. So if you want to install a very specific application, you can do it through this as well. All right, so those are the basics of SiteGround. And what we did now is we created that public key and we uploaded it to our SiteGround environment. Now, the next chapter, the next step is I'm going to show you how to stage or clone this website and work on a staging environment so that we don't work directly on the production part of this website. So you always want to make sure that you don't mess about with the production server and rather work on a staging environment. And that's what we're going to do in the next chapters. I'm going to show you how to stage that. And with that all done, we are going to create another Git and we will start connecting our local environment with our server. All right, coming up. All right, next up, we're going to set up that staging environment and we're going to look at Visual Studio Code. As I said earlier, we don't want to mess about with the production site. We do want to set up a staging environment. Now with SiteGround, this is pretty easy. And with any or most hosting services out there, this is getting to become a feature that is super easy to do. By the way, I just quickly want to show you that when you click in SiteGround in the admin portal, when you click on that little button right there, it will open up your WordPress for you. Now, because we used SiteGround to install this specific website, it will show you a wizard. I normally exit this wizard to go straight to the back end of the WordPress site. And you will notice that, again, if you spun this up with SiteGround, you will see that they have their own kind of native dashboard where you can easily click on view site, manage pages, or even change the theme. I'm old school when it comes to this, so I just like to navigate to plugins or navigate to appearance and themes and kind of work my way around that way. Anyway, I just quickly wanted to show you this part. So yeah, that is why I said in the start, you don't really have to worry about saving your password too much because you can still log into the website from SiteGround. All right, now going back to SiteGround, we are going to look at setting up a staging environment. On the left-hand side, we have a couple of tabs here. So we have security, we have site, as well as speed, WordPress, and so on. But one thing I do want you to click on is the WordPress tab. And when you go to the WordPress tab, we have that install and manage, which we have already navigated to. But the next one I want to talk about is staging. So we are going to go ahead and set up a staging environment for this entire site. Now you're going to notice that it's still saying HTTP instead of HTTPS, but because we've overridden this and we've assigned an SSL certificate, that is not an issue. That's something we shouldn't be concerned about. All right, so with that all said, over here, we can see we can create a new staging copy, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, there is a little tip on the right-hand side. It says that you can do a full deploy of your staging, which will entirely replace the live site. So that little tip there is just basically telling us that we can replace the production site if we want to, or we can do a custom deploy as well. But let's go ahead and create a staging name. So I am just going to call this one Nightly, and we are going to create it. So now that we've named it Nightly, it has this little pop-up that says additional items detected. Hey, listen, there is a few extra items detected. Now it's picking up gitignore just because we already went and set up the git process. But at this stage, it basically says select which of the items below you wish to include. We're just going to hit activate and get it to do its thing. And you'll notice that it is saying your request is being processed. So it normally takes a second or two. And essentially what it does is it takes and makes an entire copy of our production server. server, which is great. So this can normally take a second or two. Now it's done. And now we have a couple of extra options. We can actually say go to protected URLs. And let me explain what go to protected URLs is all about. When you're in a situation where you want your staging environment or your development environment not to be accessed by the public or general public, you can set up a protected URL. So let's go ahead and navigate to that. So I'm going to go to protected URLs, and on the left-hand side under security, you'll see it took us to protected URLs. But over here, you can see that we can now essentially with staging 2, we can set up a username and password. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to type in a username. So I'm just going to say jcbcb.jb. That's my email address right there, gmail.com. And we're just going to generate a random password. I'm going to copy this and we're going to say, hey, I want you to protect. Now it's going to protect our actual staging environment. All right, so now that we have the manage protected URLs activated for this specific user, and we can see the user is going to be my email address, as well as when we click on the manage access, you can see that we can add or remove users as well. This is super handy for if you have a client or a customer or a manager or whatever the case might be, and you want to give them access to the staging environment, you can definitely do it this way. So with that all said, I quickly want to navigate to the file manager. I want to show you something. In the file manager, you will notice that we have now jcbcb1, which is our live site, and we have the staging 2 site, which is great. Now, one thing I want to note though is that this is still in a separate node, which means that if one of the sites get compromised, you still don't have cross-contamination, which is fantastic. But you'll notice that both of these sites are 2 different individuals altogether, which is great. It's a good way of doing this. And now we can actually go and make changes on staging 2 and we should be good to go. All right. So with that all said, I want to navigate back to Git because we want to set up a specific Git for staging 2. So we're just going to make sure we select staging 2 under Git, under devs, and we're going to hit create. Now it's going to create that entire Git process for us, which it just did. It's fantastic. It's done. Now with that all done, the next step is we're going to start adding and integrating our Visual Studio Code with our SiteGround. All right. So now that we have everything kind of set up, now we're going to start doing the actual cloning. So going back to the Git, want to make sure that we are selecting the staging one because that's the one that we want to work on. We're going to click the little 3 dots at the bottom here or the right-hand side, and we're going to say get info. We're going to see we have a couple of infos here. And what we want to do is we want to take this Git, and I'm just going to copy that quickly to the clipboard and navigate back to Visual Studio Code, and we are going to clone it. Now, there are 2 or 3 or several ways of doing it. I normally like to do it through hitting the little Git clone repository. So I'm going to click on that, and we're going to paste in that Git clone right there. And it will take a second here. I think I selected the wrong one. And we are going to say clone from URL. Now, when you do that, a little pop-up will appear and it's going to ask you, okay, cool, where do you want this to be saved? So I'm just going to create a new folder and I'm just going to call it temp because this is just for demonstration purposes. But for industry standard, you always want to go for repo. I'm just going to select that. So we're going to select that one. And now it's saying, are you sure you want to connect? I'm going to say yes. And if everything goes well, it's going to ask you for the passphrase. Now, remember when we set up that SSH public key, it asks us for that key phrase, and this is where you're going to use it. So I'm going to type in my key phrase and I'm going to hit enter. And it's basically saying, would you like to open the clone repository? I'm going to say yes. With Visual Studio Code, it's going to ask you, do you trust this author of this code? Yeah, I do. Perfect. Now, there you go. We are officially connected to the entire hosting environment, and we are specifically connected to the staging environment. So everything that you see here, it is connected. Now, the cool thing, and this is where it gets super cool, is we can start making changes. So let's say we want to go to our WP config file or a cron file, whatever file we want to start modifying, we can easily go to that and make any changes that we want, and we are good to go. So what I normally like to do just to test everything is I will go to something like the WP config file, and I'll just in the comments just put in all caps test and make sure everything works. I'm going to hit save, and if everything goes well, on the left hand side of your Visual Studio Code, you're going to see that there's a little one that's going to pop up in the source control. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this and we're just going to check it in. I'm just going to say first test check in. Perfect. And you'll see the changes that we're going to check in, and I'm just going to hit commit, and it's going to say, hey, do you want to push that to the master branch? I'm going to say, yeah, sure, let's go ahead and sync that. Now normally it's going to ask you for that passphrase again, so I'm just going to go ahead and type it in, and if everything goes well, I probably didn't type it in properly, that's why it's asking it, and we should be good. Everything is done. It has checked in. So now we can go see if we can see this test in the actual File Explorer. So I'm just going to close this guy and we can navigate back to File Manager, and we are going to make sure that we are selecting staging 2, and let's open up a WP config, give it a second here, and there we go. There's our test. That's how easy and powerful Git is. Like, this is next level. We don't need to use FTP or anything like that. Now, with that all said, I don't necessarily want all of these files included when I start coding my WordPress site. So we want to check out and see, okay, what do we want to include and what don't we want to include? So one thing is we can start off by saying we don't want WP admin included. I don't feel like that is something I want. So I'm just going to go / and add a little star to it, as well as WP includes. Like, we don't need that. As any type of developer knows for WordPress is we don't really touch those files. So I am going to just add that as well. By the way, drop in the comments below if you want me to create a video on how to properly develop a theme or a plugin on WordPress. I would truly appreciate that. And while you do that, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. So let's go ahead and hit save here, and let's check our git ignore. So I'm just going to say git ignore changes, and we are going to hit submit, and we're going to go and sync. It's going to ask for that passphrase again. All right, so now we committed this, which means that we don't need any of these files anymore. And if you have the proper plugins installed for Visual Studio Code, it will not show it to you. All right, so with that all said, we just did a check-in. Now, one of the things that I would love to see hosting companies like SiteGround do is give us access to full Git history. That's something they don't have, and that's why we are using GitHub Desktop. So when I have the GitHub Desktop open here, I can actually go and manage that specific branch and that specific check-ins and look at the history and all that kind of good stuff. And in the next part of this video, we are going to look at that. I'm going to show you how to do this and how to manage it through this GitHub Desktop. Also, make sure to stick around, because after I show you this, there's some cool stuff I want to show you as well that's really going to speed up your development process, especially if you use SiteGround as your development server. So make sure to stick around. All right, so in this part, we are going to look at GitHub Desktop. We are going to play around with it. I'm going to show you why I use it and why it's important to use it, especially if you work with any type of hosting party like SiteGround, because they don't have a full GitHub or Git repository view where you can see people checked in code or anything like that. So we're going to use GitHub Desktop to achieve that. So to do that, and yours will look a little different just because you haven't perhaps maybe not used it in the past, but it's pretty straightforward. What we want to do is we want to go to File and we want to say add local repository. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to add that repository that we've already created. So in my case, mine was located right outside under temp, and we are going to click on that specific folder that we cloned from SiteGround, and I'm going to hit open, and we're going to add repository. Now, it does normally take a second or two. Mine did it instantly, but one thing you're going to notice is that on the left-hand side, I have two because I obviously tested this out before I created the video, but when you hover over it, you will see the actual file location, and that's where the important part is. So we are at the right spot. Now, what you can do is when you navigate to the history part, you can see, and this is where it's so important, you can see all the check-ins, all the changes that you've done, and it'll show you what you've added and what you've removed. So remember, we added that test, and it's showing us clearly what is going on, and that comments or that commit comments that you have when you check in your code, it is showing it right here, which is really, really powerful, really, really cool. So extra features as well. You can right click on it and you can check out, comment, reorder. You can revert back, which is super powerful. That's where the whole powerful thing is as well. But another cool thing about this GitHub desktop is we can create branches. Now, if you don't know what a branch is, you can imagine it literally branching off from the original code, which is master, which I highly recommend. We can branch off, we can code something, and then eventually we can merge those branches together. Again, drop in the description below if you want me to create a video about branches and how to manage branches and when to use branches. With this all done, we have successfully connected to the server using Visual Studio Code, using Git, using SSH, using a public key. And now I want to show you a couple of cool things. So next up, I want to show you in the last chapter, I want to show you some awesome things that I have discovered using SiteGround for so long and why SiteGround is my number one choice when it comes to WordPress hosting. So make sure to stick around. All right, so this part of the video is the extra features. It's kind of like this secret tool set that I'm going to share with you. I am super excited to do so. And also, I am going to share why I love using SiteGround. Now, a couple of things. First things first. Now, in the previous part of this video, in the previous chapter, we had a look at our staging, and we also had a look at setting up management rights or setting up users for our actual staging environment, which we'll see now in action. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go into our nightly build. So I am going to click on this so that we can log into it. And when you click on it, it is going to say that the network is not private. So I'm just going to close this down because one thing we do need to do, again, is we would need to set up an SSL certificate for our staging. So I'm going to do that right now. We are going to select our staging environment. We're going to say, let's encrypt, and we're going to get this thing to do and implement an SSL certificate. Now, SSL, as you probably know, because you are probably an experienced WordPress developer at this stage, or even new, SSL certificate is super important. And in most cases now, these days, you can get it for free. In the old days, you always had to pay for this. So that is great. And again, using SiteGround, it is so simple to implement that SSL certificate. Like it just takes a few clicks, a few seconds, and we are good to go. So while it's doing that, I want to go to protect URLs because I want to double check and make sure that we have our user set up. So you can do that as well. Double check that, make sure that the user is set up for your staging environment. So I see that we do have a user here, and I can see here that we have our managed or protected URLs. So everything looks good, and we can see that we have everything up and running. So this is perfect. Now, navigating back to the SSL certificate, we can see we have our Let's Encrypt. It's all good to go. All right, so with that all set, we're going to navigate to staging, and we're going to click the move or log into the back end. When you click that button, it moves you to the back end of WordPress, which is perfect. Now, again, this is where all the good stuff kind of happens. Now, first off, we want to navigate to plugins. We want to see what is installed. So we have Security Optimizer, SiteGround Central, and Speed Optimizer. So one thing I personally, I'm not a huge fan of the SiteGround Central, so I am going to deactivate that one. We can definitely activate that later on if we want to. But what I really want to focus on is the Speed Optimizer. So let's have a chat about that. And one thing that's going to happen is when you navigate to this, it is going to ask you, hey, get the most out of this plugin. You want to collect technical data. I always go confirm. That is good to go. But when you do that, you're going to notice that it's saying that the caching status is enabled and 2 out of 4 is kind of configured. So we got to configure it. Now, if you don't know, caching is super, super important for WordPress. And when you use a hosting environment for WordPress, you always want to make sure that you use their caching system. Now, by far, SiteGround is the best. It's like they created their hosting environment specifically for this and specifically to optimize your WordPress performance. So with that all said, what I like to do, and I normally do this once I've finished developing my WordPress site, because if you implement or activate it while you are developing your theme or your plugin, your caching can kind of be in the way sometimes, especially when you refresh your site constantly. But let's assume and let's pretend that we've already developed this or we are setting up this WordPress site and everything is good to go. So with that all said, we want to make sure that we activate file-based caching. So we want to make sure that is activated, and we want to activate memcache. Now, one thing you're going to notice is when you try and activate it here, it's going to give you an error, and I'll show you how to get past that error. But let's get back to that in a second. I want to scroll down. I want to show you a couple of things. Caching settings, you can do automatic purge, which is by default activated. So it basically does automatic caching purging for you. And you can also do manual cache purging if you want. Again, if you are developing or you're busy developing, this might be beneficial for you. Now, you can also exclude specific URLs. Now, when it comes to caching, there are certain URLs, for example, a JS file or a certain script file that you don't want to cache. You can also add it in here if you want. I barely or rarely use this just because the caching system is so robust and so great. All right. The other thing as well is they can also exclude specific post types. Now, that is important, especially when you have a WooCommerce store or you have a custom built API. There are certain scenarios where you do want to exclude URLs and post types. So by default, I don't really mess with this, but that is definitely something that you can modify if you want to. Now, browser-specific caching is another feature that is great. You can activate this and you can basically generate caching files separately for different browsers. I normally do this. I like to activate that because that's definitely something that can be in your benefit. Now, this is all part of making sure that you hit the website speed to an optimal position, especially if you have a large website. This and modifying your settings within your speed optimizer is definitely beneficial. So you're going to notice that with SiteGround, you have a lot of settings that you can change, which is awesome. You don't need to install any type of extra plugins. This is all done and it's all synced within the browser. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. Now, one thing you can also do is enforce HTTPS through this plugin itself. Now, we've already done that in SiteGround itself. So we've already done that at this part right here. So we don't really need to activate that. We can leave that. But one thing you can do though, is you can also do the fixed insecure content. So we can activate that, but it is going to say when you try and activate that, it's going to say features unavailable. And the reason why it's saying that is because this feature only works if you have the enforce enabled. I'm not going to do that because, hey, we've already done it here. So it doesn't really need to do it again. But if you want to go ahead and do that, you can definitely do that. All right. So there's extra things here as well. And this you can start tweaking. Things like the heartbeat optimization. You can start tweaking that once you go into Google Lighthouse or any type of Lighthouse or speed test reports. You can really fine tune. Again, drop in the comments below if you want me to create a video and how to tweak an existing WordPress site. I've done this for many, many years, and I've got a huge website to load in less than 300 milliseconds by tweaking these settings. All right. Another thing to look at is front end. So you can also minify your CSS files. I always do that, but you got to be careful, especially when you work with Sass files, especially when you work with Bootstrap. You want to make sure that you know what you're doing here. And you can also exclude CSS files, and you can also combine, and you can preload combined files, which is also pretty cool. But again, as you are making these changes, you want to constantly navigate back and make sure that your page is loading properly, because sometimes if you combine CSS or you minify them, you can run into issues with a specific theme or a plugin. All right, JavaScript, you can do exactly the same thing. You can minify your JavaScript. This is huge because in the old days when hosting environments did not offer this, it took us hours to kind of get to this point. You had to use multiple plugins to get to the end result here. That's why I love this. It's so great. All right, so with that said, you can minify your JavaScript files, combine your JavaScript files, and you can also do defer blocking. Defer blocking is huge. Again, drop in the comments below if you want me to create a video about defer rendering or defer blocking or anything like that when it comes to optimizing your website. And again, this is all about speed. This is all about loading the website super, super fast and loading it instantly. You can see when we hit refresh here, it's still not 100%. Like it's still taking a second or so to kind of load. So there's still a lot of work and there's still a lot of tweaking to do. But again, with this and with these settings, we can definitely modify it and tweak it. All right, so the next one is media. This by far is one of the biggest things. Now, when I develop a theme or I develop a website in WordPress, I always use a Gulp task manager to convert my JPEGs and PNGs into WebP formats. But with SiteGround, you don't need to do that. You can set up an image compression, and by default, it is disabled. So we can select edit and we can have a look at it. We can see, okay, what kind of compression level we want here. We can set low, medium, high. I normally set low or medium. You always got to keep an eye on it. And you always want to make sure you say backup all original images. And if you have a website that you've migrated, you can also do, I want to compress the current ones. And you can also override image with custom compression level. All right, so I'm just going to hit confirm here. This is a brand new site, so that that override is not really going to do anything. There is nothing in here, so that's not going to basically do anything. But you're going to see that the compression does take some time, and we're just going to leave it for that. Now, the other thing that's really cool as well is media optimization. So you can do lazy load, which means that your images will only load once you scroll past it, which is really important, especially as part of that speed test. If you want to get that 99 or 100% mark, by the way, getting 100% is near to impossible, but I always aim for 99 or 98. And here again, you can exclude specific CSS classes from the lazy load. Now, this is something I don't really use. Maybe if I code something in Tailwind CSS, I would maybe use this, but in most cases, I don't really mess with this or do anything here. But one thing you can also change is the maximum image width. So this is quite handy when you have a website that is managed by a client or a customer, because sometimes they just upload random images that is so big, right? So we can set the maximum image width. All right, so the last thing is site performance. You can literally run a page speed test right here, which is so cool. So awesome. You can set your desktop or mobile and you can hit analyze, and it will start analyzing your site. It will run a speed test and it'll tell you, hey, this is what you need to improve, or this is what you should not improve, or whatever the case might be. I will show you all of that. So in this case, we can see that our Google score is 94. So it's not 100% there yet. And that you can definitely see when you hit the refresh here, we still have that second of loading time, and we can go technical and go into the inspect element. By the way, I'm running this on Safari. If I were to actually optimize this, I'll be running this in Firefox or Edge or Chrome to really see what is going on and how to improve this website. Now, one thing as well is you can also have page speed history. Now, this is important if you're constantly refreshing and doing a page speed test of the website. You can see your history and you can see how you improve it, especially if you do that for a customer. All right, so that is speed optimization. That's one of the secret sauce, secret recipe, secret stuff about SiteGround that I really like. The next one is security. Security is super important when it comes to a WordPress site. And this is super cool because we can actually manage the site security of this. So we can do a couple of things now. By default, when you spin up a WordPress site with SiteGround, they already have activated most of the stuff for you. This is a huge one. You always want to disable XML RPC. That is specifically meant for if you do any type of API integration into the main WordPress infrastructure. But by default, we don't really need that. And that is a huge exploit. So we always want to make sure that we disable that. So by default, it will be disabled. Now, there's extra things as well as you can hide the version of WordPress. You can lock and protect system folders. And again, by default, this is all activated. So not really anything that you need to change here. You can also delete the default README file. I like to do that as well, just to kind of keep everything clean, and also disable RSS. So if you don't use any of the RSS or ATOM feeds, also want to disable that. Next up, login security. Now, this is one of my favorites because you can actually go and change your custom login URL. This is also definitely recommended. So you can see that it is set to default. We can go custom and we can say something, whatever you want. You can say whatever you like in here. So I'm not going to add anything because this is obviously just a demo site, but you can add that in there, play around with it. Definitely important. Now, the next one is logging access. So you can manage, this is super cool. You can manage what IP address can actually access the backend. Super, super cool. Again, you can go to what's my IP, get your IP address, add that, and maybe do that for your customer or client or whomever is developing on the site. And this will lock down the site so that no one else can actually log in that is not added as an IP address. All right, so the next one, again, I would highly recommend it, is two-factor authentication. You can activate two-factor authentication. And when you do that, you want to click at that specific point and you want to start adding your users right here. And again, drop in the comments below if you want me to show you or create a video or showing how to do two-factor authentication. I am just going to skip this part for now. Another thing, by default, the security plugin does this, is disable common usernames. So we want to stay away from common usernames like admin or login or anything like that. You want to stay away. Always use your email address. And I always say use extra third-party services like First Login or 1Password or whatever the case might be to really store your complex passwords. All right, and then the last one is limit login attempts. I always set this to 3. I always want to make sure that that is set to 3. Now I'm getting an error here, and the reason I'm getting this error is most likely because I'm working in Safari, so that's fine. We won't need to worry about that for now, but if you want to go and set that to 3, you can definitely do that. And then the last thing is activity log. So you can see, okay, so I was just logged out here, so we're just going to go back and we're going to log in again, and I'm going to go to staging nightly, just log this guy back in again, and we will go to security, and I want to go to activity log. I want to show you here. This is an activity log of what has and who has logged in. So you can see your IP address and you can see who's registered, who's blocked, weekly report, which is super awesome. Now, again, back in the day, before we had proper hosting environments like SiteGround, we had to install multiple plugins just to get the features, but SiteGround is giving us these features, which is really awesome. Again, part of that extra hidden features, which I really, really like. All right, so then the last one is post-hack actions. This is really one of, honestly, the best things that I've seen. And I'm saying this because, as I said earlier in the video, I've had 200 sites compromised and I had to move it. And it was so bad. And this extra feature helped us a lot, because what you can do is it reinstalls all free plugins. So that's one thing you can do. You can reinstall all the free plugins. You can force a password reset for all the users, which is really cool. And you can log out all the users. So obviously, when it comes to recovering a infected site, this is only one. Now, to add, I've done it for many years. I have recovered many hacked sites. Drop it in the comments below if you want me to show you how to do that. But overall, that's the basics when it comes to SiteGround. Now, there's tons of more extra features that I'm not going to cover in this video because I don't want this video to be hours and hours and hours long. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's still a lot of extra features that SiteGround offer. Again, I have a link in the description of this video. If you want to sign up for SiteGround, it is a good deal. Make sure to check that out. And with that, I want to say thank you for watching the video, and make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. I do post videos like this on a weekly, daily, monthly basis. And with that, check you later.